Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and as you might imagine, especially in the second hour, we're going to spend some time, obviously, talking about what's been happening in Ukraine, but also you will see that I've posted some articles on watching the Russian economy collapse before our very eyes, what's happening there. Also, what this is going to mean to your own income and how, in some things, are going to be much more expensive. Also, a little brief update on a abortion bill, which may be the most extreme bill that's ever been put forward in Congress. It's not going anywhere, but it's something to talk about. And before we're all through, we'll get into some other topics. One, a very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson. So we'll cover quite a number of topics in the second hour. But the first hour today, we have devoted our time to a very good book by our good friend, Dr. Michael Youssef, a forward by our good friend, O.S. Hawkins, who's almost always in studio with us as well. And if you're familiar with Dr. Youssef, you know that he's the founder of Leading the Way, and perhaps many of you actually have a chance to hear that. Founding pastor of the Church of the Apostles, holds his Ph.D. in social anthropology from Emory University, author of more than 40 books, including The Hidden Enemy, which we've talked to him about, life-changing prayers, and this one, Never Give Up, holding fast to biblical truth in times of danger and despair. As always, Dr. Michael Youssef, it is a delight to have you on the program.
What a pleasure to be with you, Kerby. Wonderful of you to have me with you again.
Well, this one is similar to others you've warned us about. I remember when we talk about the hidden enemy, sometimes people say, well, I understand the enemy of Islam, and you have certainly educated us about that. You've also educated us about the hidden enemy, if you will, of liberalism. And even in your own denomination, people didn't give you much of a chance of being successful at Church of the Apostles, which shows them how much they knew about that. But this is more of, if you will, the danger inside the church, because we're seeing more and more individuals, some of whom you talk about in this book, we've interviewed on this program, who either have decided to, quote, deconstruct their faith, that is, leave the Christian faith, or in some ways compromise the Christian faith. And that's why O.S. Hawkins says this may be one of the most significant books that he's ever had in his hands and had a privilege of doing a forward on, and one of the reasons why you felt you needed to write it.
Yeah, well, I think I tell people that just the foreword by O.S. Hawkins is worth of the whole book. Because he's so gracious and I've been a dear friend, and I am so grateful to him. Because, it's not an easy book in many ways, especially in the light of this flood of departure from the faith, whether through moral failure or just a conscious decision to turn you back, what Bible called apostasy, turn their back on the faith or whatever. We are really swimming in it right now. And, the interesting you mentioned about my former denomination, mainline denomination that I used to belong to. And what grieved me and literally led me to write this book is that all those wars and all that I have been involved in the mainline denominations 30, 40, 35 years ago, they're exactly the same language are used by so many called evangelical megachurch pastors. It's the same language. It's almost And I always say the devil is just not very clever and he's not very creative. Any creativity comes from God. He steals them, and he just keeps repeating them since the Garden of Eden. Did God really mean this? Did God really mean this? And so, but when I saw this as happening in so many, evangelical churches, I must confess to you, at 73, I'm getting a little bit more emotional. I'm getting older, but I literally sat there and wept, and I said, well, it's no use just weeping. I need to do something, and I need to warn the young pastors, particularly, and the seminarians, and those young Bible teachers, and the next generation, don't fall for that trap, because it is a trap of the devil, and the consequences are not just a few years on this earth, but eternity is hanging in the balance. So out of that deep emotions and tension that I felt, it was almost like deja vu all over again. I'm seeing the same thing happening in the evangelical church. On the one hand, it could be just one of those, the signs the Lord Jesus made very clear that, he even asked the question, when the Son of Man returns, will he even find faith on the earth? But by the same token, I did not want to just kind of say, oh, well, it's written and it's going to happen. And I wanted to do whatever I can, light a candle instead of just cursing the darkness, and really appeal to as many of the current generation as well as the future generation to know what's at the stake. And it's huge. And so I wrote this book. The words of the Apostle Paul, they're not really my words. I just applied them. I don't have any creativities either. But what I have is from the Word of God, and I just expound it.
Well, again, you do a great job of reminding us that this is not new. Paul was encouraging and discipling and empowering Timothy to speak those issues and to address that. And he was dealing with various kinds of heresies and apostasy then. But I think it gets back to this very troubling issue, because I was speaking last week as well. And at one point I said almost the same thing you did. And I said, can't these people get a thesaurus and come up with different words, because ultimately you have, especially the critics of Christianity, well, it's homophobic, it's racist, it's white supremacy, it's whatever. But even inside the church, you have people that say, well, I want to be relevant and I want to be culturally aware and all the rest. And so as a result, I'm going to try to be as woke as I can be. And what I've tried to say to the younger pastors, and I think you'll agree with this, you can never be woke enough, because look at people that aren't even Christians that are being attacked, like Joe Rogan and Bill Maher and people like that. And I think that's another warning to individuals. If you're going to try to be hip and woke, it's not going to work in your church either.
No, because there was never be enough. I remember the days in the 70s and the 80s, again, in the mainline denomination, and the homosexual movement, and my heart goes out to those who are caught in that lifestyle. I love people. But the lobbyists and the strong activists at the time would come to these conventions and would say, look, all we want you to do is just leave us alone. And we said, well, leave them alone. But then now the Archbishop of York, the second highest position in denomination in which I was ordained, the Church of England, he's now saying that any clergyman in England who would not hold a homosexual marriage in his church need to leave the Anglican Church. I mean, we've gone from just leave us alone to now, you get out of here unless you agree with us. And so it's never enough, as you said, Kerby, absolutely the truth. It's just never enough. Once, it's like Jesus saying to the Samaritan woman, you drink from that water, you're going to be thirsty, you're going to drink more and more and more, and going to get worse. But and so you start accommodating, and I've seen it with my own eyes of somebody that I happen to know, maybe a church pastor, and he started taking one step, then the next step, then the next step, and then half of the congregation, one of his congregations, now completely taken over, and God knows what's going to be next.
We'll take a break, continue our conversation with Michael Youssef. New book out, Never Give Up. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We still don't know the origin of the virus that killed hundreds of millions of people worldwide. 2 years ago, the consensus was that it was a zoonotic virus that jumped from an animal species to humans, or perhaps jumped through an intermediary at the wet market in Wuhan, China. There were a few reasons then and many reasons now to doubt that scenario. There was only one laboratory in China able to handle such coronaviruses, and that was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It seemed like quite a coincidence that the outbreak took place there, and there weren't any animals tested that had this virus or anything like it. But we now have even more biological evidence. Matt Ridley and Elena Chan are the authors of Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19. They provide plenty of circumstantial evidence for a lab leak, and they also answer the question of why finding the origin of the virus is so important. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was the center of the global effort to catalog viruses with pandemic potential. We also know that scientists there were engaged in gain-of-function research. Even more important is the fact that this virus has a unique 12-letter genetic sequence that is not seen in other coronaviruses that also makes it much more infectious. They also explain why it is so important to find the origin of this virus. If it came from animals in the wild, we need to identify which species carries this virus. If it was produced from some farming practice, we need to stop that practice. And if it came from a laboratory, we need new safety and regulatory procedures. We need to know the origin of this pandemic, or we're likely to experience another one in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation a little bit later, 1-800-351-1212. This book, Never Give Up, it is released on March 1st, which is today. So we're privileged to have one of the first interviews with Dr. Michael Youssef, forward by our good friend O.S. Hawkins. It is a very readable book, as many of his are, about 190 pages. You can get it in both paperback and Kindle. Probably will find it in your local bookstore, but since it just came out today, we certainly have made it possible for you to get it also on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you'll also see that we provide a link, and that takes you to, again, a very important organization called Leading the Way, and you only have to remember the letters ltw.org, and that will get you there, and you don't even have to remember all that because we have all of that listed on the website, pointofview.net. Dr. Michael Youssef, okay, why is it some people actually give up on the Christian faith? Why is it that they become woke? Well, I found one reason. It's fear. That is, you know as well as I do, and I've spoken at various universities across the country, and I know what happens sometimes when you open up for a question and answer period. Somebody comes at you pretty hard, or a friend, neighbor, coworker says, wait a minute, you don't believe that, do you? And so you have a whole section early on in the book about encouraging words for discouraging times, words from Paul to Timothy, but most importantly, just an entire page of all the places where Jesus tells his followers, fear not. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, obviously the Apostle Paul, Timothy is his son. He called him a son in the faith, but not a biological son. And I think that that intimacy, that knowledge of Timothy, and how Paul knew, and you can read through that, and it's not really a secret, but you can see that he knew the strength and the weakness of this man who is his son in the faith. And obviously he was easily intimidated, easily felt kind of embarrassed when people attack him, or certainly fear. He focused on fear because he actually goes ahead and names that as a spirit, one of the demonic forces that works. I'm not into the demonology, but I can tell you just from those words, I am absolutely convinced that this miserable creature, that demon known as fear, does havoc with those of us who are in the pulpits. Because the very first thing is that, you know what's going to happen? The church is going to empty. You're going to be preaching to half-empty church. People are going to clear up. They're going to go to smell fungus over there who is preaching a soft message. And what you need to do is you need to soften your message, and you need to take the rough edges of the gospel.
And that's what they told you 20, 30 years ago, didn't they? I think I remember the story.
Yeah. Boy, you have a fantastic memory with all the people that you know. My goodness, God has really blessed you. Yes, I mean, they just said, look, you can have, we have a mega church. It's not a small church. We're blessed of God beyond my imagination. But I remember this dear man said, look, all you need to do is just soften the message. You'll have 12,000 members because the location, you're in the middle of, in the hottest location in the city of Atlanta. I said, well, I'd rather take 2 people, but that came after prayer, by the way. It wasn't an immediate thing because I was tempted, and I want to say that so that to encourage anyone who's being tempted. And I pray, and I really thought about it. But after a great deal of prayer, and the Lord, I literally, not audibly, but I sense the Lord to be saying, I'd rather you come up here with a handful of people to heaven than have millions of people in hell cursing you for not speaking the truth. And that was a turning point in my life, and I've always been grateful to the Lord for that wake-up call, because it's a slippery slope. As you literally take one step, and before you know it, you're at the bottom, although it's a bottomless pit. But you're right. I mean, the Lord Jesus, how many times? Matthew 8, you have little faith. Don't fear. Don't be afraid of them. And Matthew 10 and Matthew 14, just don't be afraid. Because he knew, our Lord who made us, nestled us in our mother's womb, he knows us inside out. He knows that this is a very powerful spirit, and it's a spirit that focuses specifically on Christian leaders. And once they weaken the Christian leader out of fear, they know that the rest is history. They can get to the pew once they got to the pulpit. And you're exactly right. That's why I started with this, because he was saying, look, God did not give us a spirit of fear. That spirit is not from God. That is an evil spirit, and you need to fight it. You need to stand up and denounce it and move on, and God will take care of you.
So one issue you address is the issue of fear. The other is do not be ashamed, because, the Apostle Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. But I do get the sense that some individuals want to downplay parts of Scripture. And in the past, that used to be, well, you guys, maybe you're just overboard on your statements about homosexuality. Well, the Bible speaks about extramarital sex and premarital sex and homosexual sex and the rest. But so we sort of downplayed that. But now people are even wanting to downplay the whole idea of race and racial reconciliation, and wanting to buy into some of the ideas of critical race theory and those kinds of ideas. So in some respects, it isn't just being ashamed of the gospel, it's actually giving a different gospel, aren't they?
Exactly. As a matter of fact, I think when Paul said to Timothy, don't be ashamed of me, he was probably, some folks from, I don't know, the Judaizers or whoever is coming around and say, Timothy, Paul is going to die, and you're going to be all alone, and just deny him now, kind of distance yourself. They wouldn't say deny him. Distance yourself from him, because, he's trouble, and you're going to be tied with with his reputation, and you're tied with that brush. Paul's brush, and therefore said, don't be ashamed of me, because I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Being ashamed of Paul is basically he was saying, look, this guy is too strong. I had people who have come to me, in all honesty, we're going to celebrate 35 years of amazing work of God here in Atlanta. But some through the years have come to me and said, look, Michael, you just preached too strong a message for me. I need to go and find me a softer message. And I said, I grieve for you, but that's, it's between you and God. It doesn't matter to me because I ain't going to change it. If you're thinking that you might be coming here to persuade me to polish the gospel so that it be palatable, you're going to be waiting for a long time, if ever, because that's just never been. But that is okay. I mean, someone said, "Oh, distance yourself from Youssef." That guy just absolutely fundamentalists, and I've heard every name in the book. They called me, and I take it all as a badge of honor, and that's what I want to appeal to younger leaders, younger church leaders, younger pastors, younger elders, and deacons. Don't be ashamed of the gospel, because Jesus himself said it, because he knew that this is a powerful force of being ashamed of him. And he said, if you'll be ashamed of me, I'm going to be ashamed of you before my Father in that last day. And oh my goodness, I would rather have Jesus not be ashamed of me than what the others can do to me. What can they do? Take my life? Wonderful. I go to heaven.
Well, again, we need to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take some phone calls. Might as well open up the phones because they've already started ringing. So Michael Youssef tends to do that. So if you'd like to join the conversation, it's 1-800-351-1212. And we'll come back and get into a little bit more of some of the issues. The subtitle of the book, Holding Fast to Biblical Truth in Times of Danger and Despair. And I do want to, a little bit later, get into some of the really interesting studies that have come out about how sometimes you can feel an incredible pressure to conform. And one of the chapters there really gets into that in some detail. Some things I've looked at it before, but we'll talk about this, and just the need for us to stand for truth. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about what Michael Youssef is doing and about his church, again, we have a very easy link to you. It is ltw.org, and that is an opportunity then that you can receive some of the material that he has made available, and you can watch him online. You can obtain his devotional, his journal, and all sorts of other resources. And of course, we have a link there as well to the book, Never Give Up, coming out March 1st, which is today. And so I thought you would want to be aware of the book just as it has come out. And of course, we always love to hear Pastor Michael Youssef address some of those issues. If you're ever in Atlanta, you might want to swing by and attend the Church of the Apostles. And if you would like to know more about this book, we have information about it so that you could get it either in paperback or Kindle. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. I think some of you have some thoughts about what is wrong with the churches in America today. Michael Youssef has some ideas on that as well. So we'll have a dialogue about that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Might just mention that a week from tonight, actually, we're going to all have a chance to hear Michael Youssef, because he is actually speaking at the opening session of the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And Michael, we're going to be there as well. We'll be broadcasting live all week. And on Friday night, actually, Point of View will receive an award for 50 years of broadcasting. Marlon Maddox started this program in 1972. I didn't come on the program till about 1980. I wasn't a guest host till about 1986, but that's still 36 years worth of broadcasting for me. And again, 50 years. So again, we're going to be in the audience cheering you on as you speak Tuesday night. I suspect maybe on the same topic.
I am. Yes, the same. I'm talking about why it's very important never, never, never to give up, because, and especially when giving up is so easy now and it's fashionable and all that. And so, yeah, I'm going to pour my heart out to these men and women, and maybe the last time they'll invite me back, but at least I'm going to give them the full load.
Well, I hope you'll come by our table here. We'll be doing a live broadcast. We may not have a chance to interview you, but at least we get a picture with you.
Yeah, would look forward to that.
Yes.
I seriously would talk about it on Wednesday or Tuesday. Either time, I'll come and say hello. I look forward to that.
Yeah, maybe we can just record something real quickly. You know, my producer has a special recorder. We could just grab something real quickly, get a picture and a few things. Anyway, we have some people who'd like to talk to you, and I do want to get to some other parts of your book, but let's give you a chance to express some concerns and some questions about this. And can somebody put line 1 on for me? Because at the moment we are not able to. There it is. We got it. Thomas in Texas, KCTA. Thank you for calling today.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Hi, Thomas. Good to hear from you.
Hey, I saw an amazing video the other day on Facebook. It just popped up, and I was so kind of surprised. Trump and Osteen and Slick Rick Warren, Duplantis, Copeland, Furtick, etc., were all lavishing praise on the Pope. I wasn't surprised about the preachers, but Trump just couldn't say enough good things about the Pope, and it kind of amazed me. I kind of already knew that he was buddy-buddy with him, but problem with the body of with the Church in America is that first of all, they don't rightly divide the word of truth. Romans 2:16 says we're going to be judged according to Paul's gospel by Jesus Christ. Yeah. Paul's gospel, not Peter's. And the fact that everybody's using the NIV, for instance, the NIV has 6,552 omissions in it. These Bibles are fake.
Let's give Michael a chance to kind of respond, because, again, rightly dividing the Word of God, a very important issue, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely. And I sometimes I say to people, God brought a man all the way from Egypt so they could be a pain in the side of liberal evangelicals, and I am convinced, because having lived for the first 18 years of my life in the Middle East and another 8-9 years in Australia, it's a hard soil there as well. I went to seminary, was ordained. That God gave me all of this to come to a point where I'm able to, at least in this country that I deeply love and I long to come to, that if I make a contribution, it will be a contribution. I did not come here for the American dream. I came for the freedom, number one, but I also, part of what I can give back is to hold pastors' feet to the fire and say, do not compromise, because that's the end of compromise. Here's, look at this, and look at this, and look at this, and that's what I am trying to say here. When I was in London 3 years ago, well, I go every year. We have a major, in fact, we're about to celebrate 20 years of ministry in the UK
there you go.
This October with a big celebration down at Westminster. But the amazing thing to me was when I arrived there, they said, well, the Christian media wants to have a press conference, so they had all these Christian media people, and they were coming at me and said, how these evangelicals like you support Trump. And then I said, wait a minute, my vote goes for Jesus. I said, don't tie me up with any brush except Jesus. Anything you want to say about me, I'm totally Jesus man. And that really, all of these people, I don't care how famous they are when they get together, whatever they say and whatever they do, don't let that affect you. Don't let that, don't waste your time on that. Stick with the Word of God and be faithful in sharing of the gospel with your friends and neighbors, and be urgent without being rude, that your time is short, and we don't have a lot of time, and we need to say, escape while escaping is good. Today is the day of salvation.
And again, one of your chapters is on the last days, and I would like to have you address that because, if you listen to Michael Youssef or David Jeremiah, after a while, you're so convinced we're in the last days, you don't even want to buy green bananas because you guys have so scared us and so convinced us that we are in the last days. But that also has caused some people, instead of being fearful, to be sort of apathetic, to just want to just sort of sit around and wait for the Lord's return. Of course, your argument is just the opposite. If indeed we are in the last days, and I'll leave that to someone else to try to figure out, that should give you more motivation to be involved, don't you think?
Absolutely. Coming from a Reformed background, I have never been an in-time preacher with the charts and all this and coming and who's going and who's coming and what's where. That's not me at all, in fact. But I think what I understand in the Reformed tradition that I grew up in is that, look, every generation must live as if they are living in the last days. And that this generation is no exception, that we should live. I think it was John Wesley who said that I basically pray and live as if the Lord is coming tomorrow, but then I work as if he's not coming for 100 years. And that is really, when people talk about the end times and all this end time mania, that novels of the Left Behind and all, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. But do you realize that today, less than 2%, 2.4% of Christians tithe? During the Depression, there were 3.5 of the Christians tithe. And so don't tell me the end times and the end times and end times just to scare me. But tell me the end times, so I can work hard, and I'm at it. I sleep very little. I sleep 5 hours, and I work day and night. At 73, I've got new projects coming out of my ears, and I give all I can, and I give, and that's. But this is all because I want to believe that these are the last days. So the last days should not be things that make us grow jaded and careless and, sit on the couch and say, Jesus is coming back. Put on the white robe and get up to head for the mountains. No. Experiencing and believing that Christ could come any moment is the motivational for working and giving and serving and doing, and not sitting on, all my seminary mates, all of them, bless their hearts, that have retired 7 or 8 years ago, started retirement. And I said, well, I'll go out of my mind if I do that. Simply because, how can I be urgent in season and out of season, as Paul told Timothy, when I'm sitting back? What do? Play golf? How many golf rounds can one play? Put my feet up? How long will that be? So I really want to encourage old, young, in between, to live and to work as if Jesus is coming tomorrow, but also to plan if he's not coming back for 100 years. That's really been But when Paul talks about the end times, in this particular epistle, he talks about the coming judgment.
Yes.
And if it is in the text, I'm going to deal with it. And this is certainly in the text, and there's so many of the signs that said this is going to happen in the last days, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. It doesn't mean that we should be discouraged, but in fact, we should be motivated.
Well, we certainly should. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I do want to maybe focus just for a second on the incredible pressure to conform. You were talking about having come from Egypt here. Rod Dreyer's been on the program before. We talk about Live Not by Lies, and he's interviewed people that have lived in Ukraine or Belarus or Hungary or Poland or the Soviet Union, and they come here and they say, I'm seeing here the same things I saw over there. And so you have this wonderful study, and I'll just mention it so that you don't have to talk about it after the break, because they had people come in and they were supposed to judge which one of these lines matches the line that's on the left side of the page. Well, the answer should be C, but they actually had people as Confederates going in there saying, oh, no, it's A or it's B. And after a while, when all these people are actually saying that line A or B is accurate, and they're not, it's very easy. You have it in your diagram in the book. There was a pressure for people to conform. And I think of Romans 12:1 and 2. I think of Colossians 2:8. And so when we come back from the break, I want to get into that, because that's another pressure, not just on the leaders we're talking to, but the people in the congregation. So let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with our good friend, Dr. Michael Youssef. Never Give Up is the new book, and we'll continue right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Dr. Michael Youssef. Again, the book is entitled Never Give Up, came out today, and we have information about it on our website. Of course, a link to his website as well. Let me encourage you to go there, because this is a great website, LT LTVW.org, which again stands for Leading the Way. But again, we have all that on the website. But what about this idea of being conformed? You know, we're told not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind in Christ Jesus. We're supposed to be conformed to the image of Jesus in Romans 8. And then we're also warned in Colossians 2:8 not to be taken captive. And yet I would have to say today, and I have a survey that we've just done recently, just published in the February issue of Decision Magazine, the Billy Graham organization, that demonstrates that most people, especially the younger they are, the more likely they are conformed to the world, not to the image of Jesus Christ.
No, because it's a lot easier. It's a whole lot easier to go with the crowd, just like the study you referred to before the break. There were many, by the way, when I was doing the research. I came across a whole, but I like this particular one by this Polish psychologist. And really, truly, when you think about it, here are people seeing the thing in black and white in front of them as wrong, but they would go because the crowd, the majority, went that way. I don't want to go against the majority. And this is something I want to say a word to parents, fathers and mothers, and I'm blessed to have 11 grandchildren now, and I talk to them all the time, that you need to train your children not to be embarrassed to stand up for the truth, even if the vast majority are going a certain way. But if it's the truth is the truth is the truth, you got to equip them to stand and to be strong and to be confident, because sooner or later, they will. The crowd will follow them. I used to tell my kids when they were younger. Now because they're in late 40s and mid 40s, but I used to say to them, I said, "Look, somebody's going to be a leader. Might as well be you." and leading is not, again, it's not easy. But if you take a stand, when you be patient, sooner or later the crowd is going to come and they're going to support your point of view. But it's just going to take some courage, and certainly we have a short supply of that now. So, and this is the plea that I make through the pages of this book, whether it's for parents or the people in the pews. Don't just sit, nod your head, and preach a problem with preaching a bunch of heresies. And I remember one time I was a guest preacher, and in that tradition, this is before I started Apostles, and stand at the door and I'm standing, literally next to the guy. I'm the man who preached. I mean, I can tell you can't miss me. I don't look like a sunburned Swede. But this lady comes out and says to the pastor, "Pastor, this was a wonderful message. Thank you for preaching it." And he looked at me and looked at her and said, "I didn't preach. He did." Some people are just sitting there nodding their heads. See? Put your antennas up. See if the guy is preaching the word of God. Compare. I tell my congregation this all the time. I said, if you find that I am not preaching what's in that book, you need to come either tell me or just walk out of here as fast as you can. Because it's not what they say, it's not what I say, it's what the Word of God said. That's really what matters. And that's what the message I want to have parents, I want to plead with parents and grandparents to really instill in the next generation, because that's our hope.
It is certainly very good. Just before we run out of time, first of all, I know that near the back of the book, you have a free gift. So if people get a copy of the book, there's a link that they can follow and get the ebook, Hope for This Present Crisis. And so that's one additional resource. So you kind of get a twofer. You get this book, and then you also get the ebook next to it. But let's also talk about what's available at ltw.org, because if you scroll down, you will see that there are all sorts of opportunities to watch your programs, to listen to the programs, to read. It talks about your global work, Vision 2025. Talk about what will actually be available to our listeners as they land on Leading the Way.
Well, there is a study guide that goes with this book. It's completely free. A question have to have a discussion with a small group if you're going to study it with a small group. This is all free. This is a production of our team at Leading the Way, in addition to the book itself. 2 resources, as a matter of fact. And so we would be more than happy. We never sell books, as you know, Dr. Kerby. We just say, forget the venue, man. If you can't afford it, we're not in the business of selling. Just send $1 if you can't afford it. But God ends up blessing us. So we we have, any resources we have, it's available. And the same thing when at the church, when people are leaving and want to buy a book, I said, no, not buying. You write, whatever you would leave is fine. So I really want people to be encouraged. I want people to be equipped, and I want people to, I just don't believe that God delivered me supernaturally in the 60s, out of the horrors of socialism and communism of dictator Nasser in Egypt, so I can come here and just have a cushy life. I really believe with all my heart. Now, I'm not just trying to come across as altruistic. I'm too old for that. I'm just saying that this is my legacy. This is Paul's legacy to Timothy and to that generation. And I take that, expand it, and I said, now it's going to be my legacy for whatever years I've got left.
Let me take one more phone call. Again, we'll take more phone calls the next hour, and our open line will go to Georgia on the Good News Network. I think, Alberta, you wanted to say thank you to Michael. Go ahead. Well,
hello, Alberta.
Yeah. Well, again, he was wanting to say thank you because you prayed for his pastor while he was visiting and just wanted to thank you, but it didn't work out. I guess we've got to put that on hold, and we'll try that another time. But anyway, it was just a great opportunity to hear from an individual that just wanted to say thank you. And just before we go, let's again talk about how people can use the book because, first of all, this is very, very intriguing because you have 8 chapters. I might just mention that we've been pretty gracious today, but you do name names and talk about some of those individuals. And then with these 8 chapters, you have a study guide. So it seems to me that individuals could use it. Let's try one more time, see if we can get Alberto on there. So let's see if we got him. Alberto, you on?
I'm here. Thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. Hello, Dr. Youssef. I just wanted to share briefly that I've been to Apostles about 3 different times, most recently with my brother Carlos, who's recovering from cancer. Maybe you remember us. We went up to the altar after the service. You were so gracious to meet with us. The presence of God was there. We felt the love of God, and you were so kind to be amongst the people after the service, just like Jesus was. And you prayed with me for my pastor, Dr. Bill McDonald, in South Carolina. And I just want to give you a praise report.
Yes,
sir. Thank you so much. And Pastor Bill is doing so much better. I wanted to thank you for joining your faith with us at that moment, and more importantly, for being amongst the people and making yourself available as a servant of God. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. God bless both of you.
Sure.
Thank you, Alberto.
I just wanted to see if we could sneak that one on. Anybody wants to leave a call the next hour, of course, we're going to be getting into some of the things of Ukraine and Russia and all the rest. But if you'd like to join us, of course, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Well, an hour is up, and hopefully a week from today, we'll have a chance to see you face to face. So, Dr. Michael Youssef.
I really look forward to it. I have fond memory of being in your studios in Dallas those many years ago, and I am really looking forward to seeing you next week in Nashville. Well,
looking forward to it. One last time, real quickly, the book, I'll hold it up for you to see there. Never Give Up, Holding Fast to Biblical Truth in Times of Danger and Despair. We needed this book more than ever, and that's one of the things that O.S. Hawkins, our good friend, says in the foreword of the book. Just came out today. Wanted you to know about that. And, okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, let's talk about Russia. Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about what it might mean to you. Let's talk about a couple of the issues in the news. We'll try to cover some of that as quickly as we can in the first hour that we have today, that second hour. But also, if you'd like to join us, give us a call.
Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So again, we're going to spend some time looking at a variety of different topics, and if you would like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Let me issue a disclaimer. We're going to talk about some things. It's going to be a little scary. So first of all, it maybe causes you to want to step back for just a minute and say, do I believe in the sovereignty of God? Do I believe that God is still in control? Do I believe that God held and holds this world in his hands? I mean, it's an important question, because we're going to talk about, first of all, the collapse of the Russian economy. You might think, well, that's good. Not necessarily. How much economic devastation do we want to bring to Russia that has 4,500 nuclear weapons? Okay, think that through for just a minute. Most of us don't think that way. Glad that we don't. I've got a booklet coming out on just war. I really avoided some of the aspects of how to think about just war in a nuclear age, although I think that is certainly relevant as well. And so some of us do think that way. And that is when you had yesterday, we have members of Congress suggesting that the United States should enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Now, as much as I have tremendous confidence in those people that are up there flying those planes, Air Force, Navy, whatever, at the same time, I recognize that the potential for mistakes are very great. What happens when you shoot down a Russian plane? Just think that through for just a minute. Does that de-escalate the situation, or does that escalate the situation? And so while we talk about these issues of the economy, what that's going to mean to you, the whole question I'm going to raise in just a minute in terms of, well, how about this? Let's think about, for example, cyber warfare. I mean, right now, if we can give credit where credit is due, I don't know if you saw this the other day, but the concern is that Russia would really try to shut down the whole internet in the Ukraine area, in that whole area of Central Europe. And as a result, he was able, that is, Elon Musk was able to put up Starlink service, which is an opportunity to, it's a satellite system which provides internet access. So there are some various heroes stepping up in the midst of this to address these issues, but these are sobering issues and ones that we need to think about. And whenever you say, well, how much more pressure do we want to put on Russia, you also have to say, what are the possible implications of doing so? And by raising that, then you have some people that haven't thought this through for more than 3 seconds suggest that anytime you raise any hesitation about bringing more pressure on the Russian people and on Vladimir Putin means you support Vladimir Putin. No, we don't. We talked about this last week with our good friend Jim Dennison. But at the same time, I think we have to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We have to use biblical wisdom, and we certainly have to pray for our leaders that they would have a level of common sense. And at the same time, I think we have to pray for Vladimir Putin, because if you haven't gone out there on the internet, you have a number of people who are respected in the intelligence community who are saying they believe that Vladimir Putin might push a button. And when you already have nuclear weapons on high alert, All it takes is one mistake, and that's not the world we want to live in. So I just wanted to mention some of that, not to scare you, but to have us think soberly about the situation we're in. But if you are wanting the sanctions to have an impact on Russia, I bear you unbelievably good news. This comes from our good friend Jim Garrity. Watching the Russian economy collapse before our eyes. And again, I'll add that one disclaimer. How much pressure and how much pain do we inflict upon Russia before there is a backlash that may be threatening? But if you are the kind of person that pays attention to currencies, the ruble plunged to a record low of less than 1 U.S. penny. That's unbelievable. Just absolutely. You had 118 rubles to a dollar before recovering to 84 rubles to a dollar. So you can see that there were some definite reactions. I was watching that the other day, and if I think I got it right, I think if you will, the whole maximum amount, the market cap of Bitcoin is higher than the ruble, which is amazing. And of course, for us to put this in perspective, although China is, I think, the great enemy and the great country to pay attention to, we obviously don't ignore Russia because they have nuclear weapons and also have a leader that is, I think, completely unstable. But if you want to try to compare economies, I remember years ago I was at an event where the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, was claiming then that actually the economy of Texas is larger than the economy of Russia. So he says, that means I'm more important than Vladimir Putin. Well, no, but you get the point. So we are talking about a country on the decline. One, because of demographic issues. We've talked about this before. They are facing a demographic winter and that collapse. The economy is kept up by two things. Number one, their military actions, and number two, the fact that they can sell oil. Matter of fact, they're selling it to China. We'll get to that another day. So that's the first thing. Now let's go to a couple of other people before we take a break. The Economist says that this was one of the largest one-day slumps in the Russian currency's modern history, similar in scale to one-day declines recorded during the worst moments of the country's financial crisis in 1998, when Russia defaulted on its debt. By mid-morning in Moscow, the Russian central bank raised its key interest rate from 9.5% to 20%. Those of us listening that have gray hair or no hair at all might remember 20% interest rates back in the 1970s. We're headed there, by the way. But those were an attempt to actually stem the slump of the ruble. And the country's finance minister ordered companies with foreign currency reserves to convert 80% of their income into rubles. So that's, again, just an illustration of the devastation, not even just of the economic sanctions, but even also of the threat of the economic sanctions. One analyst on CNBC said that the Russian currency has pretty much lost all value outside of the country. You think? To me, he says it doesn't really feel like we're looking at, or at least going to see, the bottom in the ruble here. I think there's still plenty of more room for weakness to come. Well, when it's down to basically a ruble for a penny, I don't know how much further you can go, but you kind of get the idea. The Moscow Stock Exchange delayed its opening and declared it to be closed for the day, so you can kind of see where that's going. And the Russians, of course, no longer have faith that their banks will remain solvent. One of the quotes here, Russians waited in long lines outside of ATMs on Sunday, worried that bank cards may cease to function or their banks would limit cash withdrawals. So what happened in Ukraine last week happened in Russia yesterday and today, and will continue on. By the way, this interesting story about one individual that actually was a financial investor in Ukraine, and he actually crossed the border with Bitcoin. He was able to open up shop, but, because he couldn't use the ATMs in Ukraine or anything else. So that's kind of interesting to see how that's played out. But we need to take a break. When we come back, what's that going to mean to you? And what are some of the possible threats? And then we'd love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We still don't know the origin of the virus that killed hundreds of millions of people worldwide. 2 years ago, the consensus was that it was a zoonotic virus that jumped from an animal species to humans, or perhaps jumped through an intermediary at the wet market in Wuhan, China. There were a few reasons then and many reasons now to doubt that scenario. There was only one laboratory in China able to handle such coronaviruses, and that was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It seemed like quite a coincidence that the outbreak took place there, and there weren't any animals tested that had this virus or anything like it. But we now have even more biological evidence. Matt Ridley and Elena Chan are the authors of Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19. They provide plenty of circumstantial evidence for a lab leak, and they also answer the question of why finding the origin of the virus is so important. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was the center of the global effort to catalog viruses with pandemic potential. We also know that scientists there were engaged in gain-of-function research. Even more important is the fact that this virus has a unique 12-letter genetic sequence that is not seen in other coronaviruses that also makes it much more infectious. They also explain why it is so important to find the origin of this virus. If it came from animals in the wild, we need to identify which species carries this virus. If it was produced from some farming practice, we need to stop that practice. And if it came from a laboratory, we need new safety and regulatory procedures. We need to know the origin of this pandemic, or we're likely to experience another one in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me, for just another minute or two, talk about Russia, and then I'll talk about the implications for us and our economy and the possible threat of cyber warfare and what that might mean. Again, number one, my disclaimer, I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm just telling you the truth. The kinds of things that I read, I hope that you don't read, because if you read too many of these things, it probably would keep you up at night. But at the same time, you want me to be honest, I want to be honest. And there's some issues that definitely deserve some discussion. Number two, my other disclaimer, which we'll get to in just a minute, when I talk about the impact that's going to have on Americans, don't think me crass, because in some respects, the suffering that our people and friends and others that we are praying for, especially Christians in Ukraine, is greater than anything we'll ever face. I understand that. But at the same time, I think some of you are wondering, well, what's the future look like here in light of this, especially if we have a second involvement of a major superpower, and this would be China, and go to Taiwan. You want to know that. I think you deserve to know that. It makes it very easy for somebody that's critical of this program can just say, what a crass statement that this guy spent time talking about how Americans would suffer when people are suffering in Ukraine. No, that's not the point. The point is to give you some answers that maybe you would like to have discussed, because sometimes they're discussed and sometimes they're ignored. And there are consequences to these sanctions. But again, the piece that I've posted just a minute ago by Jim Garrity reminds us that there is a couple of lessons from history that we should apply. One lesson is clear. Once you're in a war, You must win the war as thoroughly and completely as possible. So he says if Russia doesn't suffer severe consequences for starting this war, either Putin or one of his successors will try something like it again. So it's hard to envision how any of this and us can feel like this a good chance of lasting peace as long as Vladimir Putin runs Russia. We got that. Okay. Sure, perhaps this particular battle halts with a ceasefire in the near future. I'm somewhat doubtful of that, but okay, that's a possibility, theoretically, with minimal Russian territorial gains. But really, what's stopping Putin from trying again in a year, another year, or even just trying to finish the battle? So again, the whole question is how stable, mentally stable is Vladimir Putin? The article that we posted yesterday, if you didn't have a chance to hear the program, you can go back and listen to it, but the first article is one that comes from very reputable sources, people that are both Republicans and Democrats. I even mentioned some that weren't in the article, like Condoleezza Rice and others, that have all said the same thing. We've been around Vladimir Putin. Condoleezza Rice said, I've been around him for decades. Senator Marco Rubio talks about this is not the same person that was there before. And so I think this is a scary scenario indeed. Then Jim Garrity goes on to say, one painful lesson from World War I think you know what he's going to say here, is that if victorious nations humiliate the defeated nations, the defeated people may simmer in resentment and suppressed rage for a decade or so, and then elect some demagogue who rides into the long stewing hatreds to power, creating even bigger problems. We need to come out of this conflict, he says, with a defanged Russia that doesn't blame the West for its suffering and isn't going to look for another manipulative strongman to come along and promise them a return to past glory. On the military front, of course, the news is somewhat mixed. Let's give credit where credit is due. I don't think Vladimir Putin or even the Russian generals anticipated the courage and the resolve so far of the Ukrainian people and the military. And the favorite line, it's been used a couple of times this week, but I guess I can use it too. It's a cliche that's a little overworked. Russia has bitten off way more than it can chew. So again, that's part of this first article. You can read it in its entirety. I only picked out points to illustrate the point, but to recognize that what is this going to mean for you? First of all, we'll talk about just from a financial point of view, but what if instead of launching a nuclear attack, which some people on various talking head shows have talked about, Russia launches a cyber attack? I think that's an important question, and I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. Let's look at money first. That is our second article here, in which Timothy Nash spends a fair amount of time basically giving you a bottom line, and that is, guess what? Everything is going to be more expensive. He says higher prices for basketballs. Who knew? Pacemakers, automobiles, lipstick. Okay, the ladies don't like that. Okay. But again, a lot of this is various things he talks about in terms of everything from the Putin's foreign policy to the Federal Reserve Bank, money printing, the green energy policies of the Biden administration. I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around. But nevertheless, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, still claims, and I think rightly so, that the economy of the United States is the world's largest economy. And when you compare that to Russia, our economy is 13 times larger, just to give you a perspective on that as well. And so it helps you understand that though it is not an insignificant country from an economic point of view, it is not one of the major ones. And for those of us, again, a little bit older around the table, when we remember that the two superpowers were Russia or the Soviet Union and the United States, that's if you will, come down rather dramatically. The issue of oil, well, again, I don't see how you can get the oil any higher, and then as soon as I say that, it goes higher, because on February, the West Texas Intermediate crude closed at $95 a barrel, briefly surpassed 100. I don't see how you go over much more, but then again, I would say it's got to go over 100 again. So here we go. And so it's going to cost a lot more, not just to gas your car. Let me remind you that you notice that when you stick that nozzle in your car and the pump, but everything else that you get comes from people spending money on gasoline or diesel. So again, all the prices go up, not just the price at the pump, and you pay the price for it because of that. And so we're starting to see, as he points out, that there are all sorts of decisions that were made because of this in the past. And the first, he actually gives us 6 real quickly. I'll do them real quickly, and then we'll take a break and get into cyber warfare. He says, first of all, President Biden's decision have enhanced the political and public policy initiatives of unfriendly countries like Russia and Iran. And recognize we're working right now with an Iranian so-called peace treaty again. We'll see where that takes us. Number 2, European allies have become more dependent on unfriendly nations for their oil and natural gas needs. Of course, we've seen that from the Middle East and now Russia. 3, Russia and Iran will sell more of their inferior oil and natural gas on the global commodity markets. This, coupled with a decline in U.S. oil and natural gas production, will yield an increase in the production of dirtier petroleum products. So if you really are concerned about climate change, green, actually, it's going to take a bad problem and make it worse. Number 4, Biden's decisions are helping employ thousands more Russians and Iranians in high-paying oil industry jobs because we've shut down what? The Keystone XL pipeline. Now they may shut down some of Nordstrom and some of the others. We'll see where that goes, but that is the case. Number 5, the U.S. economy will lose billions, not only because of the loss of revenue and profits for U.S. oil companies, but a decline in related corporate tax revenues on the local, state, and federal levels on those regards as well. People always say, well, we'll just sock it to the oil companies. Oh, we'll just close down the oil companies. Guess how much goes into the corporate income taxes, which keep you from having to pay them? I know most people tend to forget that stuff. And number 6, and finally, if U.S. oil markets had remained less regulated under the Biden administration, he argues, domestic and global oil supplies would be higher today. The price of oil per barrel on the global exchanges would be lower. Vladimir Putin's ability to fund that would be more limited. And so a lot of this relates to all sorts of other issues. We don't tend sometimes in the economic world to see the synchronicity, that's a big word here, the interconnectedness between things like the price of oil and the amount of the revenues that provides for a person like Vladimir Putin. You know, if nobody bought the oil from Russia, it would collapse. It's pretty much collapsed. The ruble's collapsed right now. But you can begin to see that if Germany and all sorts of countries in Europe were not dependent on Russian oil, by the way, if we weren't even somewhat dependent on it, Russia would collapse because it would not be able to fund all these activities. And eventually the tanks would run out of fuel. And that would be that. As a matter of fact, one of the tanks did run out of fuel, so they went to a local gas station to try to fuel up, and then they were taken prisoner. You can't make this stuff up. Anyway, we're going to take a break. We'll come back and briefly talk about a couple of other issues because there's a lot more to cover. And if you'd like to join us at any point, that number again is 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about cyber attacks, maybe a little bit about this abortion bill going through the Senate. Lots to cover. We'll do that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour as a program note. Let me just mention that tomorrow we are going to actually do a very insightful interview, I hope, that will come from a discussion, first of all, with Dr. Richard Weichert. We've had him on the program before. He has a new book out called Darwinian Racism. You know, we talk all the time about white supremacy and the whole idea of racial superiority and all the rest. And on one sense, you have to recognize that going all the way back in history, the Greeks thought that they were more advanced than the barbarians. One of the reasons why in Acts 17 you have the Apostle Paul saying we're all of one blood. Don't have this idea that you were created by a different creator or that you're different or any sense. Or I'm sure the Romans saw themselves as more significant and the barbarians as well. So that's always existed. But this modern idea of racial superiority really goes back to a book written by Charles Darwin, because actually the subtitle of The Origin of Species is about the preservation of favored races. And so we're going to talk about that with Dr. Richard Schweikert in his book, Darwinian Racism. Also have in studio with me Dr. Ray Boland, because he's written a book years ago, which we've talked about on this program, Darwin's Race and Racism. And so we're going to get into that. The focus primarily of Richard Schweikert is what happened in Germany. Ray Boland gets into some of that, but also brings it home to America. And so we'll get into some of those issues. And then tonight is the State of the Union address. I guess in the second hour we'll spend a little bit of time talking about it, but I don't know that a lot of you are going to watch it. And the old joke is, we watch it so you don't. I'm not even sure I can bring myself to it. First of all, it's election night for us here in Texas. Second of all, after seeing some of the things that his advanced people are saying he's going to say, you just got to roll your eyes. I mean, at a time when we are in a major crisis in which almost all sorts of things that seemed to be working right a couple of years ago have come completely off, and we've lost. The wheels came off in Afghanistan. They're coming off in Ukraine. We have inflation that we haven't seen in 40 years. And then to stand there and say, the State of the Union is good, and we are a resilient people. Well, maybe we are, but not due to some of those policies that are going to be flouted tonight, and then we're going to be scared to death about everything from climate change to everything. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but I suspect we'll give you a couple of the relevant quotes, and then we'll move on to some other topics. And so that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what will be taking place tomorrow. And again, if you would like to not even have us cover the State of the Union address, that might be the first time in the history of Point of View and the USA Network we ever didn't. But I get the sense some people say, I just don't care. I'm just not interested. And I have never seen that, even when we've had presidents, which we've had some questions about. But nevertheless, that just gives you a little bit of a sense of what may unfold tonight and how we'll try to cover some of that tomorrow. Let's, if we can, mention that before this hour is up, this last half hour is up, I will get to a bill that has been moving its way through Congress. It won't pass the Senate, but I think it's important for you to know how extreme this bill is, because it's relevant to whether or not you want to have individuals that believe in such an extreme abortion bill should be serving in Congress. And then a very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson, which I'll only summarize, The Crowded Road to Kiev, the whole idea of what is happening in Ukraine. But before we do that, I thought it would be good to at least alert you to the fact that there are different forms of warfare. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric warfare from terrorism, of course, the military action, military warfare, but also cyber warfare. And this, to give credit where credit is due, comes from Amy Zegert. She is the author of Spies, Lies, and Algorithms, The History and Future of American Intelligence. As I've been studying her, I'm thinking we might want to have her on the program. I need to know a little bit more, but she's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute in Stanford, and actually has been talking about this whole idea of cyber warfare. Anyway, she has noted that we have obviously technologies that are digitally controlled. Think of that cell phone that you might have in your pocket or your purse. Think of the internet. Think of all the areas already where we have artificial intelligence. Think then of the satellites orbiting, which right now allow us to carry this program. There are a few stations that carry this through the internet, but most of them pull this off of a satellite. We have a transponder on that satellite. It's a point of view transponder. And it goes from here all the way up and all the way back down again, and actually travels that incredible distance in 2/5 of a second. But anyway, those are all ultimately possible targets for cyber warfare. She says in cyberspace, the most powerful countries, including the United States, are simultaneously the most vulnerable countries because they're so digitally connected. And that's especially true of democracies because our freedom of speech enables the possibility of deception at scale. And of course, the good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods in cyberspace are all connected, as we find out when our information is stolen and hacked. So we all know kind of that would be indeed the case. So one of the concerns would be that if indeed we had a cyber attack, that could shut us down in ways that we have never really thought about. Which brings us, of course, to a conversation maybe we'll postpone to another day, because I did want to talk about China, but again, enough in Russia today. We'll postpone some of the conversation about China tomorrow. But let me just mention in passing that, first of all, this Russian invasion into Ukraine certainly has the potential to embolden China to take action against Taiwan. Now, Taiwan itself produces an inordinate amount of microchips and computer chips that are used in your computer, in your cars, and just about everything that we see around us. And I've seen some estimates that say 3/4. I've seen some estimates that have said 80%. So I don't even know what the number is, but you can see that all of a sudden, if China controls Taiwan, they wouldn't want to shut down the chip manufacturing necessarily because they'd want to make the money. But again, they might limit the amount that would be shipped, for example, to the United States, or they might charge more for them. You can see where that goes very quickly. And of course, right now we have a chip shortage. Just imagine if we have the Chinese occupation of Taiwan, what that means. And so that is the case. Of course, with the Russian invasion, we've already seen oil prices shooting up. Okay, Doug reminded me that at the moment, the price of oil is $104 a barrel. I saw where it was up to $106 a barrel. Do you think it's going down or up? I think we know which way it's going. So there we go. And that's going to be the case as well. So again, when you start thinking of all these threats, cyber warfare being one of those, again, Ukraine's information center just said the other day that some of the banks already had been taken down because of cyber attacks. We have America's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that's called CISA, and it's already issued what's called a Shields Up alert for U.S. organizations. And the agency stated, here's their long quote before I take a break: the Russian government understands that disabling or destroying critical infrastructure, including power and communications, can augment pressure on a country's government, military, and population. The Department of Homeland Security added its warning last week saying, quote, we assess that Russia would consider initiating a cyber attack against the homeland if it perceived a U.S. or NATO response to a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine threatened its long-term national security. So obviously we need to be in prayer for this president, in prayer for people, maybe even Silicon Valley, in prayer for people that work in this area of technology. And the lesson we learn here, I think, is that we need to be peacemakers. We need peace like never before. You know, Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. In Romans 12, verse 18, Paul says that if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. And so we're certainly told in 1 Timothy 2 that we are to pray for those in authority, and so I certainly would encourage you to do so. And back to my key point, some of this can happen really almost instantaneously. You think of the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, June 28th, 1914. Far away, led to World War I, and 116,000 Americans died. Or the bombing of Pearl Harbor turned everything around on, again, December 7th, 1941. 400,000 Americans died. We hope that there will be wisdom on the part of our leaders because just even the cyber warfare could bring us down very quickly. And that's why I encourage you to be in prayer as we talk about some of the things unfolding in this faraway place called Ukraine. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that these are two articles that we also have on our website in case you'd like to read them. One by Brian Birch, just talking about this abortion bill that passed the United States House of Representatives. Fortunately, will not pass the U.S. Senate, but I think the point I'm making is this. The so-called Women's Health Protection Act, which Brian says should be better named Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act, which I think is very accurate, by the way, was actually voted on in the House of Representatives. 435 members of the House of Representatives, and a majority of them, almost exclusively Democrats, voted for this. So they're going to then be asking for your vote. And you should ask them why they would vote for something like this. Some of those individuals that voted for it are not running for re-election because they recognize that it's going to be very difficult for Nancy Pelosi to still be Speaker of the House next year after the election. But the bottom line is you have to understand how radical some of these ideas have become. I won't go into all the details, but basically this bill, which passed the House and is being considered in the Senate, of course, would actually take Roe versus Wade and make it federal law. It would nullify all state laws restricting abortion. It would require healthcare workers to perform abortions and direct various federal taxpayer funding for abortions. And this is so much more radical than where the American people are. He says, for example, pro-life doctors and nurses would see their ability to opt out of abortion procedures eliminated. Healthcare professionals would be strong-armed into performing and participating in abortions regardless of whether they have moral objections. And lest you think, well, that's kind of where the American people are, let me give you a couple of polls that are in this article, and you can read it in its entirety. The Marist poll that came out this year on America's opinions found that 71% of Americans, nearly half of Democrats, by the way, would limit abortion to, at most, the first 3 months of pregnancy. 54% opposed using taxpayer money to fund domestic abortions. Well, this last summer, we also have the Associated Press poll, in case you think this was an outlier, and that one came up with the same kinds of answers and percentages, including it found that 65% of the individuals say that the abortion should generally be illegal in the third trimester, and 80% thought that it should be illegal in the third trimester. You know, if indeed we have the Supreme Court rule on this issue of abortion, it will be reverting back to the states. And at this point, I'm thinking it's going to be hard, even in the so-called blue states, to implement something like this because it is so much more radical, so much more extreme than anything we've seen before. Just wanted to mention that because I know many of you are very concerned about the pro-life issue. Again, it illustrates how radical the Democratic Party has become. And it used to be an assumption that if you were pro-life in some jurisdictions, that would be a negative as you were running for office. Now it's almost reversed. If you are holding to and voting for something as radical as this, that becomes a negative, and it's something else to pay attention to because just look at us here in the state of Texas. We just had Election Day, and again, we have more than 30 different members of Congress in the House of Representatives, and more than a dozen of them voted for this piece of legislation. So you will have similar kinds of ratios in your state, and you need to ask those questions, and that's why we want to equip you to be able to know how to ask those questions. But while we're talking about Ukraine, I thought this very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson was very good. He breaks it into a couple of areas. I won't get into all of those, but one of those is the Russian agenda. He says Vladimir Putin feels that Russia was once a great player in world affairs, actually more feared, he points out there, than anything else. He thinks if he can grab back some of the old Soviet Union's now lost territory, that Russia would again become a superpower. He is deceiving himself for sure. But he knows that the longer some of these republics are westernized and become acculturated to the passions of popular culture, the more difficult it would be to actually cause them to join to Russia, Mother Russia. And so that is one of the reasons why he has taken this action. And we've talked about that before. The other question he raises is, will Ukraine survive? He says, in theory, Ukraine should not last given the numerical odds against it. And we've seen these unfold even today. I fear for the Russian soldiers that will die, but I fear even more for the Ukrainian soldiers and citizens that will be affected by this. But interestingly enough, Victor Davis Hanson, kind of a student of history, says it's almost a mystery that the Russians seem unprepared for this invasion. And so it seemed kind of interesting, but it was also interesting how the Ukrainians were sort of unprepared. There almost got to be a sense in which, is this really a dominant military force in Russia? And number two, wasn't there some thinking on the part of Ukraine to block the roads and mine the roads and some of that? Apparently not. Of course, Putin has been massing troops since November. And, of course, the question a lot of people ask is why didn't NATO flood the country with weapons back then? And, again, you've had individuals that have said, who are part of the intelligence community, who said they were surprised that actually Putin was going to go into Ukraine. I mean, they just simply thought this was all a bluster and a threat. Still, back to the point, Victor Davis Hanson says the Russians may, we hope, have a hard time of it in Ukraine, if for no other reason than the country is larger than Iraq, both in size and population. I keep trying to explain to people, go look on a map. You will be amazed at how big Ukraine is. It is the second largest country in that region. The largest country is, of course, Russia. It is huge, and it has lots of supply conduits for ways in which NATO countries could begin pouring in weaponry. And is it possible that they end up with some kind of guerrilla siege in Ukraine that's maybe reminiscent of what happened to Russia in Afghanistan? Anyway, the other issue, of course, that he talks about is, do we have a military that's a deterrent? Because he says, we used to be a deterrent, but factor in, he says, the Afghanistan humiliation, walking away from about $80 billion in arms and equipment, walking away from a $1 billion Kabul embassy, and as well the multi-million-dollar refit of the Bagram Air Base. We're not the same military that we were not so long ago. And he says, the problem is America's become more and more woke, and we're also mired in $30 trillion in national debt. We print $2 trillion a year in mockery of inflation, he says. Our major cities are crime-ridden. The streets almost look medieval sometimes in some of these places, with homeless and sidewalk sewers and race relations. I think we'd all agree, worst in memory. And so he says, in short, America is no longer the America it was, say, even in 1990. And when you have now no southern border, you have 50 million people in this country that were not born in this country, maybe not even having allegiance to this country. We're not the same America we were before. So if all of that causes you to want to pray for the leaders, pray for the State of the Union address tonight, pray for future candidates to maybe turn this around, I hope I've done my task. And so those are just a few issues we've put on the table today. The collapse of the Russian economy, the fact that it's going to get more expensive, and even this crowded road to Ukraine, some lessons we can learn there as well. All of it available at our website, which is pointofview.net. Of course, we also have the interview with Michael Youssef, which is still there and available to you. Most importantly, I want to thank Doug for sitting in today as our engineer, Steve, of course, as our producer. Look forward to our conversation tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.